This is the best-selling comic of 2025. It's not published by Marvel or DC or Image Comics. It doesn't even feature a well-known character from an established intellectual property. Instead, this is an original story by a renowned creative team published by a small company. And according to its CEO, it had a print run of over 900,000 copies, not only making it the best-selling comic of 2025, but the best-selling independent comic since Jim Lee's Wildcats in 1992, which sold over 1 million units. This sales story seems to be a miracle. When Batman relaunched in 2016, its first issue sold 304,000 copies. When The Amazing Spider-Man reached issue 800 in 2018, the comic sold a whopping 439,000 units. So for this obscure title to outsell modern Batman and Spider-Man at their best is a truly astonishing feat. This comic sales numbers seem too good to be true. That's because they are. Planet Death Issue 0, the comic in question, is published by Bad Idea Comics, a recent comic publisher with a crazy history of controversial marketing. User Navo from Reddit expertly chronicled the company's history on a post last year with sources to back it up, and it shines a light on just how insane this publisher is. Link below, by the way, in case you want to research all of this further. Bad Idea Comics was formed in 2020 by 5 industry veterans, some of whom led the successful revival of Valiant Comics in 2012. The company launched with a baffling but intriguing proposition. They would only publish their comics once. No reprints, no digital copies, no collected editions or trade paperbacks. If you wanted to hold a Bad Idea comic in your hands, you would have to pre-order it in advance, or you wouldn't get it at all. They made it even more difficult to get a hold of their comics when they announced that only 20 comic shops that strictly adhered to their guidelines would be allowed to carry their comics. Using artificial scarcity to garner sales is a very controversial practice that I don't really like as an individual who wants media to be accessible and art to be preserved. Marketing your comics using rarity and exclusivity as a selling point does work, but it makes fans focus on the business and collecting side of comics rather than reading and enjoying the stories being told. But Bad Idea Comics would immediately break their own rules during the release of their first comic, ENIAC Issue 1 by Matt Kindt and Doug Braithwaite. This comic was distributed to 236 comic book shops instead of the 20 that Bad Idea initially planned to send them to, and ENIAC Issue 1 had a second printing, even though the whole point of Bad Idea Comics was that they would only be printed once. Since then, Bad Idea Comics has continued their string of wacky and weird marketing gimmicks. In 2021, they held an event for fans to pre-order their final 5 comics, which they would have to pay for blindly without knowing a single thing about what they were getting. Oh yeah, and each title in the final 5 lineup cost at least $8 per issue. The company also partnered with CGC in 2021 to launch the first invisible comic, Conceptual Funnies Issue 1, which was a stapled piece of transparent acetate that they managed to slab and sell for $1,000 each. I am not kidding, this is something that actually happened, and CGC had to step in to stop Bad Idea from selling these slabbed invisible comics. In 2022, Bad Idea sold donuts bundled with a comic, and last year they did a similar thing with pizza but for free. From 2023 to 2024, no new Bad Idea comics were sold in comic shops. Instead, the company published their comics through Kickstarter and relied on their small but dedicated fanbase to fund their releases. The way that Bad Idea has operated over their short and eventful history would not suggest them having the best-selling comic of 2025. They've always limited the amount of people who could read, purchase, and access their stories. That is, until now. Planet Death Issue 0 sold over 900,000 copies because Bad Idea changed their entire strategy for the release of this comic. While it is a huge achievement to sell almost 1 million copies of a comic in 2025, the way that Bad Idea achieved those numbers makes Planet Death's success way less surprising. The biggest factor for this comic's incredible sales lies in its pricing strategy. This comic is dirt cheap. Planet Death Issue 0 retailed at $2 instead of $4 or $5 that single issue comics usually cost. For me, this comic only cost $1 because I think my local comic chain just wanted to get rid of them. And the reason comic shops could sell this comic for almost nothing is because Bad Idea sold Planet Death Issue 0 in bundles of 25 for $7.5, meaning that each copy of the issue cost retailers about 30 cents. The issue was also shipped to comic stores a week before Free Comic Book Day, most likely so that they could be given away alongside other Free Comic Book Day releases. Many people received Planet Death Issue 0 for free as part of the event, which explains why it sold almost 1 million copies. It's basically a free comic book day issue that fans could pay to read a week before everyone else would. Bad Idea also partnered with Lunar Distribution, the company that has been distributing Image and DC comics over the past couple of years, in order to give this comic as wide of a release as possible. But why in the world would they do that? What are they attempting to achieve by handing this out to as many people as possible at a potential loss? Well, it's because they got a celebrity to write this book and have to get their money back when the series actually comes out. Planet Death is written by Robert Venditti, writer of Exo Manowar and a few recent DC titles, and Derek Kolstad, the screenwriter behind the John Wick franchise. And this comic is as close to John Wick in space as you can get. Planet Death Issue 0 showcases a battle between heavily armored space soldiers and clearly nefarious alien creatures. The book starts with soldiers being created and given their mission objective: destroy the weapon, return home. And as they arrive on the scene, they're gunned down and killed by the garrisons of creatures that expertly planned their defense. By the end of the comic, all hope seems to be lost. The soldiers lie in waste as their enemies hover over them, finishing off whoever's left alive. This entire issue is a setup for what the comic is actually going to be about. The last surviving soldier, this guy, taking matters into his own hands and attempting to complete the mission himself despite the odds stacked against him. It's a pretty standard setup for a sci-fi action story, but I will admit it was actually fun to read. The writing by Derek Kolstad and Robert Venditti effectively frames the story in the most dramatic way possible without bombarding readers with too much information and dialogue. The art by Thomas Fiorello and Dave Stewart is genuinely astonishing to look at. Spaceships are rendered in painstaking detail. The sky is colored with such care, splotched with various hues that add depth to the page. The action is spectacularly drawn, with every explosion and gunshot being visceral and impactful. This comic is also printed on old school comics newsprint, which muddies the printing and adds this rough and grungy quality to the art that I love. According to the last page of the book, it took over a year for Bad Idea to source the paper for this comic because no one uses this kind of newsprint for comics anymore. Anyway, Planet Death Issue 0 is solid as previews go. I doubt it's going to win a Pulitzer or even an Eisner, but for comic book fans willing to pay for a John Wick story set in space, Planet Death seems like a series that is going to be right up their alley. The 48-page first issue is set to release in July this year for $5.99. Check it out if you're interested. Personally, I'm not gonna buy the book since I already spent too much getting 4 comics a month, and the premise of this book isn't interesting enough for me to warrant paying $6 for each issue. I will say though, even after enjoying this preview, I don't know if this deserves to be called the best-selling comic of the year. It reminds me of the best-selling comic in 2016, Big Trouble in Little China / Escape to New York Issue 1, which sold over 400,000 units because it was part of a Loot Crate subscription box. Sometimes, comic books have record sales because they're loss leaders or part of a mystery box, not because people are actually interested in the comic itself. Although I'm inconclusive on whether Planet Death Issue 0 should be called the most popular comic in the world, I will say that for a company known for restricting their art, finally choosing to release a comic for everyone to read is not a bad idea. My name is Joshua C, and I will see you in the next one.